Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. We know that there are just so many other things going on campus, and we're just so delighted to see all of you here today and to share in this exciting time. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Robert Solomon. I serve as Vice President for the Office for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity here at Case Western Reserve University. We in our office are absolutely delighted to have you with us and certainly welcome you today. It is certainly a privilege and an honor to kick off really our 11th annual Power of Diversity lecture series. Which was created to inspire campus dialogue, community engagement, civic education, and learning about the national narrative of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Now, this series includes distinguished guests from the national or even international scene and scholars from our own faculty, staff, and surrounding community. The speakers include thought leaders and diversity professionals whose research, scholarship, leadership, and advocacy advance the university's efforts to present diverse ideas, perspectives, and viewpoints to inspire greater understanding and appreciation for inclusive excellence. Today, we're absolutely thrilled and honored to feature Dr. Ángel Reyes-Rodríguez, Director of the McNair Scholars Program at Cleveland State University. Dr. Reyes-Rodríguez was born in Guayama, Puerto Rico. Before moving to the mainland to train at Case Western Reserve University, he obtained a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Puerto Rico in San Juan. Once at Case, he first participated in the Case Post-Baccalaureate Research Education Program, known as PrEP, and then became a graduate student. His doctoral work focused on studying how human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, spreads through routine immune cell interactions. He graduated in 2015 with a doctoral degree in molecular virology. Following graduation, Dr. Reyes-Rodríguez had a postdoctoral fellowship at Lerner Research Institute with Cleveland Clinic in the Department of Neurosciences. His projects related to immune responses to coronavirus infection to the central nervous system. Dr. Reyes-Rodríguez now devotes his time to bringing equity to higher education. He is the director of the McNair Scholars Program at Cleveland State University. The McNair Scholars Program works with underserved, yet smart, talented, and hardworking students, making them competitive for graduate school applications and successful graduate students. His role is to provide these students with a mentorship program, research internships, career development programming, and other services. Program alums enroll in master's and PhD programs all over the country. He has been working on supporting equity efforts in graduate education from different roles for almost 15 years. He worked to provide minoritized graduate students here at Case with career development and networking opportunities while he served as president of the Minority Graduate Student Organization. So he is definitely one of our own. He has also worked on advocacy, communication, and networking projects for the Lerner Postdoctoral Association at Cleveland Clinic and at Cleveland State. He works on equity initiatives designed to remove systemic barriers faced by minoritized students in higher education. As a result, he was one of Crain's Cleveland Business Magazine's 40 Under 40 honorees in November 2021. And that's certainly a great accomplishment. His passion for bringing equity to higher education has led him to give talks and lead workshops locally and nationally. So his topic today, which focusing on nurturing equity to diversify academia, is at the heart of his passion and work. So please join me in welcoming one of Case Western Reserve's own, Dr. Reyes-Rodríguez.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here speaking with you. I've been to this lecture series before from the other end, so now it's like a full circle moment to get to be on this side. So I'm really glad and honored to be here today. All right. Today is the day prior to the beginning of Hispanic Heritage Month. So I'm going to take advantage of that and start giving a little bit plug into culture by just like explaining a little bit of my last names. So for those of you who don't know, in the Hispanic naming traditions, each person inherits one last name from their dad, one from their mom, and they're usually together. Normally, they're not hyphenated, but since in the mainland that's not common, I have to do it so I don't lose them. Alrighty. So with that being said, I'm just mostly going to be talking about nurturing diversity, equity, and inclusion in academia. But I'm going to start by talking a little bit about myself because I had too much coffee and I'm feeling self-centered. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. We just had a wonderful introduction. I'm not going to go over all those details again. Thank you, very generous. But I want to kind of reflect a little bit on how my background influences the way I think and I address equity. But then I'm going to move on to talk about a few of the challenges to equity that exist in higher education and share my thoughts on some of the solutions that I think might be viable to address them. And finally, I'm going to talk about the McNair Scholars Program, specifically at Cleveland State, and use that as a model to illustrate how we address equity on campus. All right? So we already went through all of this. From the biography, from my biography, you can tell two things. One, all of my training seems to be in science. And two, I'm addicted to Euclid Avenue. I have a hard time moving away. But you can see that a lot of the work that I've done, all the training that I've done, has been in molecular biology, virology, and the immune system. However, I'm really interested in equity, in inclusion, in justice, and there's other things that qualify me for that beyond a degree, because obviously that's not my degree. And there's other qualifications that go well beyond just being brown. As you can see, I'm very brown, but I've also have put on work to educate myself and figure out what are the best ways that I can, in which I can influence my community, in which I can uplift others, and how we can work together to get the equity outcomes that we're looking for. So I was born in Puerto Rico, which, again, for those of you who don't know, Puerto Rico is intricately linked to the United States, is culturally different and obviously separated from the mainland, but is politically and governmentally connected to the U.S. We've been part of the U.S. as a U.S. territory for the last 124 years. We don't have any congressional representation, and if you are living in Puerto Rico, you cannot vote for, president, Congress, and so on. So that's, the background. I'm not trying to make a statement. I'm just giving you facts. So I feel very fortunate that I'm deeply connected to Puerto Rican history through a long line of people who had long lives and who had kids very late on. So I benefited from actually getting to talk to a lot of my relatives that were really old when I was a kid. So for instance, I spent quite a bit of time with my great-granddad, who was born in the in the early 1880s. So that means that when he died, he was over 100 years old, and he predates a lot of the history with the U.S. mainland. So through him, I'm able to know what the history of Puerto Rico and the U.S. was like, but also I can put a face to those changes. I can see, this is how my great-granddad used to live, and then what that happened, that's what my grandparents dealt with, and then this is what my parents did too. So it's a way that I like to think about history so I can keep things in context. Another reason that I'm interested in a lot of these things and history, historical perspectives, is because I could see how history can influence individuals and communities just by looking at my own example. So, for example, I grew up in a neighborhood. This is an old picture of the neighborhood that I grew up in. Obviously, it doesn't look like that anymore because it's been about 100 years since this picture was taken. But it's a neighborhood that was basically a catch-all for disadvantaged people. So originally, it started as a place where enslaved people were sent to live. Then when they were freed, that's the place that they were, the only place in town where they could live. After that, as the centuries progressed, this became a site where poor immigrants that were not Catholic were allowed to move in because the Spanish colonial rule had a lot of rules, and there were a lot of people who were not allowed in town. So that's where they had to go and move in. So after the U.S. took control of the island, that became an area where impoverished Puerto Ricans of all kinds and walks of life ended up living so they could have access to work. Point being that there's a lot of generational trauma within the community. And I always like to put this into context, and I think of, again, my family. So my mom, for example, we estimate that she's like either the third or the fifth person from the whole community who ever graduated from college. That's based on what our elders kind of share with us. And 20 years after she graduated, I graduated, and I was still within the first 10 people who graduated from college from the community, and then my two sisters. So that's a way of illustrating how generational trauma can be lingering, can continue through time. And when we uplift someone from those communities and those circumstances, now they have the path and the opportunity to pay it forward and create a legacy. It's an anecdote, but I like to use it just because it illustrates how these things can work. I'm not that special, so if that happens to me, that happens to like other people in other communities as well. However, even though I like to think about all of these issues in ways that relate to me directly, I'm really aware that my path is not everyone's paths, because I had opportunities that other people don't have and tools that other people don't get to access. So to me, it became evident that if I were to help others and to think about ways to create an impact, the first thing that I had to do was to stop projecting the things that I've done into others and stop measuring people's success based on how I would have done things or the way that I've done things. I avoid doing that as much as possible. I'm pretty sure that I failed a few times, but the solution to failure is just to keep trying. So that's what I do. Every time I mess up, I'm like, oops. All right, that's one more thing I have to avoid. So, and I think that's a way of growing that is available to all of us. I strongly believe that this is our country, and we all have a duty to promote equity and to make sure that everyone has access to the support that they need, to the opportunities that they can take advantage of. And we all have a duty to correct the inequities that exist. So it's important to use those privileges that we have, however big or small they are, to make sure that others have a path to success. Because equity is not a finite resource. There's always more opportunity for others. So if I succeed, you can still succeed. It does not affect how much success I get, right? So we all can benefit from uplifting others, and others will certainly pay it forward. So as a way of doing that, it was mentioned earlier during the introduction, but I found ways to contribute from whatever position I was in. So as a grad student and as a postdoc, I work with others to create opportunities to bring resources to our grad school community or postdoctoral community, making sure that we had the opportunities to train in things that were important to us that the curriculum did not include. So that gave us the chance to network with people, to learn about things that were crucial for career development and such. And now that's my full-time job. I just work with students. I make sure that they're prepared for a life in research and they are ready for the opportunities that may come their way so they can recognize them. So that's all about me. Now we're moving on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about diversity in academia and, again, like the challenges that exist. So it is evident, it is an oxymoron, but diversity is good for everyone. So it is good for companies, for innovation in particular. There's research that shows that companies that are diverse and that have high inclusivity they keep their employees happy, they keep them engaged, they keep them from quitting, they have higher profits, and their cultures are much healthier. So it makes sense that that would be the case in academia as well, that would apply to academia. So as a result, there's a lot of institutions that have invested energy and resources into diversifying their communities. So they invest resources to recruit people from different backgrounds and to get them to their campuses. Now, there's a handful of institutions that have also worked in making those spaces more inclusive, so people can prosper and they can do the best work that they can do. However, based on my word choice, you can infer that those places are not necessarily the same or do it at the same time. So as a result, there's many places that invite people in, but when they get to those places, they don't feel welcome, and they have to deal with a lot of things that prevent them from working on the things that they came out to do. So that results in a lot of problems. For example, problem number one would be that it becomes a revolving door. So people get to those institutions, but they realize that it's not a supportive environment, and then they have to, leave because it's the safest thing for them. Problem number two is that becomes a problem for the institution as well, because the institution uses the vagueness of the word diversity to then shift resources and address other things and call it a success. All right? And that is especially detrimental to minoritized students because that means that they get left behind. Problem number three is that therefore minoritized students don't get the support that they need to succeed. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about for the most part. So I'm very intentional when I use the word minoritized. I avoid using the word minority. I will use it a few times later on because it's part of the law that my program is based on. So I kind of, it's what the law says, and it's like the word that is spelled out, so I use it. But for the most part, I avoid using the word minoritized because it kind of lacks context and the reality a little bit. So minoritized groups are groups that are involuntary minorities. They are minoritized as a consequence of either enslavement, colonialism, or conquest. Right? So these are specific groups. So when we're talking about the students, we're talking about African-American students, we're talking about Hispanic students, mostly Puerto Rican and Mexican-American. We're talking about Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. So using the word minoritized allow me to have a much more accurate reflection of the people that I'm talking about, the reason they're minoritized, and the things that still stand in their way. It's really important to remember that the prevalence of these inequities that these groups face were engineered. They just did not happen. There were very intentional ways of excluding these groups. And as a result, a lot of processes, even though they might not explicitly be designed to do that, because of the components that they're built on, their foundation, they still have the same effect of being exclusionary. It is very important to address this because when our minoritized students don't do well, we are all missing out on things. So we're missing out on the questions that their perspectives may lead them to ask. We are missing out on the discoveries that their rich life experiences might lead them to. And we're all missing out from the socioeconomic benefits that trickle down to all the communities that we have. If more people do well, the more money they spend, and the better resources are distributed through the community. That's a little bit of a sad way of thinking about it, but it's still true. So when we talk about these minoritized groups, they're heavily underrepresented in academia, particularly in the STEM fields, so science, technology, engineering, and math. So when we combine those groups together, so African American, Hispanics, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, and such, they make up about a third of the US population, all right? So when you look at the number of students enrolling for the first time in college, those groups actually do make about a third of those students. So they are well represented there. However, it doesn't take a statistician or the Census Bureau to let us know that they don't make up a third of our students who are graduating with bachelor's degree. They're not a third of the students who are graduating as grad students, postdoctoral fellows, or a third of the faculty. So therefore, we're losing this pool of very talented, motivated, driven people through the academic pathway. So again, they are at the most represented when they enroll in college, and after that, we start dramatically losing them. So in STEM, only 23% of the graduates are minoritized students. Minoritized students represent only 14% of our doctoral students, and they represent only 9% of our academic faculty. So there's clearly a lot that we're missing. Our institutions are doing great work, but you can only imagine how much better it would be if these people were bringing all of these rich experiences and their fresh ideas to academia. So there's a lot of inequities that are taking place in the academic world that affect how inclusive the environment is. The two that you might be the most familiar with would be the imposter phenomenon or the subtle acts of exclusion. So imposter phenomenon is often called imposter syndrome. I don't call it a syndrome because I get picky and I realize that it's not a medical disease. So I like using the word phenomenon. And it's a consequence of having high achieving individuals together, and with all the messaging that we get our minoritized populations, it is easy for them to start seeing the good in others, but only the flaws in themselves, to a point that they question their worth and their sense of belonging in our institutions. The subtle acts of exclusion are also called microaggressions. Again, I like the other term because a lot of times they're so subtle that they don't come across as aggressive, and they're certainly not micro. They have a big impact. So these are ways in which we tell our students that they don't belong where they are. So again, they can be very subtle. We don't realize we're doing them. Across minoritized groups, we can do it to one another. So it's something that it really affects the sense of belonging at institutions. Again, lack of belonging is a clear one. Mixed messaging. Our institutions are really good at telling students you belong here, but their acts kind of don't reflect that. There's double standards that are applied to our students. That means that they are judged differently, judged more harshly than others, and it becomes a way of telling students you truly don't belong there. I'm tired of seeing you. There's othering, so we make students feel like they're strange and foreign and a commodity, and it's not a nice way of going through life. So, for example, I have here the diversity innovation paradox. It's just a quick example of double standards. This is a study that found that minoritized scientists have higher rates of discoveries than their counterparts and higher rates of innovative idea creation. However, when they publish these findings, they're often not recognized and not given the credit that they deserve, and as a result, they're less cited than others. So it's a quick example, but powerful one of the forces that are against our students. There's also the challenge of having to navigate cultural differences. We, as minoritized students, we grew up with rich cultures. They're, very deep and meaningful, but they're very different from the people who are in charge in the institutions. So sometimes they're not judged fairly. And that's a challenge, having to navigate, having different cultural cues and different points of reference. There's also the problem that a lot of minoritized students come from underserved, under-resourced communities, which means that they don't belong to the middle class, and they have to learn to deal with academia, which is a predominantly middle-class environment. Students also may have a limited network that they can reach out to at their institutions, making them feel further isolated and preventing them from getting the information they need to figure out their next steps within the institution. And finally, these students tend to be, or they're often first-generation students. So first-generation students are the first ones in their family that go to college. When we look at the demographics of first-generation students, they're mostly female, mostly Black and brown, and mostly coming from under-resourced communities and families. They are the main challenge that comes with being the first person in your family to go to college is that you have a gap in the knowledge of how university life is like. So you have less information about how to choose schools, less information about how to apply to schools, how the university works, and such things. You also have less information about financial resources. So when, where to apply to fellowships, scholarships, grants, and such, how to plan so you don't end up with debt, and things of that nature. And the flip side is that they do have much more family commitments. So that means that a lot of us, we think about a college student and we think, oh, they're staying on campus at the dorms, they're going to fraternity parties, they're just going backpacking across the country. And for these students, this is far from the reality. A lot of our students, first of all, they're commuter students, so they live at home. Two, they often are caregivers. And number three, they tend to have more sustained family dynamics, which means that they have a role at home, they have to meet certain obligations at home, and that means that they cannot devote their whole lives to being in school the same way that we're envisioning students are doing it. First-generation students and minoritized students both are more likely to work full-time while they're in college. In average, they work about twice as many hours as their peers, and they're twice as likely to work off campus, which means that their work is completely disconnected from their educational experience. Again, they're more likely to be subject to subtle acts of exclusion, racism, xenophobia, classism, racism, etc. And they're more disconnected from the resources that they need. So another thing is the motivation of first-generation students and minoritized students. They often see attending college as a way to bring honor to their families and to serve their communities. So there's an extra weight that they carry when they're on campus. All right. And finally, there's a phenomenon called breakaway guilt. So a lot of students feel that going to college means that they're breaking with their family because they don't have the same time to commit to being at home as they were before, which is a way of feeling guilty throughout your experience and somewhat disjointed from your community. So you don't have, you feel like you're abandoning your community, but at the same time, you're not finding a community at the institutions. So it's a difficult place to be in. So I think it's time to address all of these things, all of these barriers, and start supporting our minoritized students so they can thrive at our institutions. I believe that minoritized student success equals the success of all of us. So we should really invest our time, our resources, and our energy into making academia a much more inclusive and a much more equitable place for our students. So It's probably a good idea to start when we are at our most diverse. So as soon as students walk out the door the first day, and maintain that level of engagement through their time within the institution. So a few solutions may include perhaps working on changing systems to make sure that we meet the students where they're at. You probably, I don't know if you noticed, but when I was mentioning the challenges that students face, I didn't talk about their school districts that they came from. I didn't talk about like their poverty or anything like that, because that's a way of blaming the students. If we accept students in our institutions, our job is to make sure that we provide them the tool that they succeed. If we are good at doing our job, that doesn't matter. So what we need to make sure is that we do what we're supposed to be doing, and we implement things at the systemic level that allows them to succeed, and it allows actually the people who work at the institutions to do the right thing. Because a lot of times doing the right thing is not the way things are done. So if we actually commit to make our institutions work in a way where the easiest thing to do is to do the right thing, we will be moving in a better direction. Another thing is that we're not looking to blame faculty, staff for the problems that institutions are having. I believe we still need to make people accountable, but that can be done by promoting incentives, providing incentives, as well as holding people accountable when they do things that are truly out there. But the focus should be within changing the institution. I also think that it's essential that we encourage our students to find their voice in academia so they can bring all of their perspectives to the academic environment. Oftentimes, students are discouraged from sharing their thoughts, their passions, and their interest with academia because they are told that that's unscientific, that they're being biased. When they're passionate, it's a bad thing, when for others it's, just great. So we need to find ways of allowing them and promoting them, providing them the tools to actually take those inspirations that they have, those ideas, and those passions, and turn them into scientific papers. We also need to start implementing programming that is designed specifically for minoritized students. So oftentimes we are victims of thinking that we can do things that help all students, but in reality that doesn't help. Studies have shown that when initiatives are created that are explicitly created to help minoritized students do well, but actually all other students do well as well. However, when we do the opposite and we do things for all students, we end up leaving our minoritized students behind. And then finally, we need to start engaging students in high-impact practices. So those are ways of keeping the students engaged with the institution and to keep them in a place where they can access the best of themselves and bring them into academia. So studies have shown that when we use high-impact practices, undergraduates are more likely to stay connected with the institution, but they're also more likely to graduate, to have higher GPAs, and actually to go to grad school. So some of those practices include explicit efforts to show them how to navigate college. So this is especially important during their first year, to tell them what resources are available, how to reach out for those resources, help them understand, because this is, again, we have to remember that this is a foreign concept to them. So we have to show them how to plan their day so they know how many commitments they can make, how to study, and all of those things that are essential during their first year to build up and continue through college. It's really a good idea to have more courses that are writing intensive so they can actually get more familiar with the process of synthesizing ideas, putting them in writing, explaining what they mean. It's certainly an easier way to understand what they're thinking rather than just rely on yes, no, and very formulaic type of questions. One of the most important ways, more efficient ways of engaging students is through research projects. Students, when they work on research projects, they get to first demystify the research process. They can truly see that they can do it, because I've done it. I did that for like, I did research for like 15, 17 years, and I can tell you it's not that difficult. So we need to make sure that students realize that that's something that they can do. But doing research also has other consequences. When you do research, you also get good at solving problems. You get good at communicating your ideas to people, and you actually get experience going to events where you share information, receive information, and you expand your mind that way. Another way that's crucial is mentorship. We often say that it takes a village to raise a kid. Well, I have to say that then if we believe that, then we actually have to introduce the kids to the villagers. So they actually get access to the resources that they need. They learn how things work. They learn how to connect to the resources. They know what things to prioritize and what things to kind of leave for later. It's essential that our students get guidance, because all of us use guidance to get where we are. So I don't know why that's so difficult to comprehend. And then finally, we need to make sure that we create spaces for them to build a peer support system, to engage in these relationships that are going to be crucial for them, not just to navigate academia, but also to celebrate when they achieve things, to consult, and to just feel at home, because you're talking to people who understand your references, they understand what you mean, you don't have to explain everything you do, and you have goals that you can share and that you can constantly talk about. Just to conclude this section, just my final thoughts. I think that we have to nurture our students' intellectual curiosity and bring them to academia so they can be explored using the tools that academia has to offer. We have to start looking at our minoritized students as individuals that are full of potential and whose ideas are eventually gonna save the world. Then we have to work on removing systemic barriers to their success and engage them with high impact practices. Then finally, I'm going to talk about the McNair Scholars Program, which is what I do day in and day out, and just kind of highlight how these equity measures are implemented. So these are some of our current McNair Scholars doing some of those high impact practices. So these are mostly pictures taken at conferences. And I'm just going to guide you a little bit about how the program came to be and what it is and what we do. So our program, the McNair Scholars Program, is named after the late astronaut and physicist, Dr. Ronald E. McNair. Dr. McNair grew up in South Carolina. He persevered through his education and ended up having a PhD in physics from MIT. Focusing on lasers and spectrometry. After that, he had a very successful career in academia, publishing papers and doing the academic circuit, but he eventually felt like he was outgrowing his field, so he decided to try to become an astronaut. He eventually did. He became the second African-American in space, and he had a promising career that was cut short when he was a crew member of the Space Shuttle Challenger, which exploded in 1986 and truncated all that potential. However, his legacy lives on, and our program is one of the ways that his legacy is still alive. So the McNair Scholars Program is one of the federal TRIO programs. So these are programs that provide services to underserved students. It became law as part of the Higher Education Act of 1965. It's funded by the Department of Education, and the goal is to provide support throughout the academic pathway, that academic pipeline. So the McNair Scholars Program is one of 8 programs, I believe. Might be 11, but I don't know. I'll get back to you on that one. But we are the last leg of the TRIO programs. So we take students who are about to graduate and we prepare them to go to grad school. So we serve 2 populations of students with the goal of getting them to grad school. Population number 1 would be students who are first-generation students from low-income backgrounds, which, as we talked about, there's a lot of overlap between that and minoritized students. So they're the first in the family to go to college, and they have an income under a certain measure. Population number 2 would be underrepresented minority students, which is where I told you that I would use the word minority. So these minoritized students are underrepresented in education, and we want to contribute to expanding their representation in grad school. So as a quick reminder, even though I just told you, the students we serve have a goal of making a PhD, of getting a PhD, have a GPA of 2.8 or higher, even though it's usually much higher than that, and they're either first generation from low-income backgrounds or minoritized students. So our program has 3 core components. Component number 1 would be a research internship. So we prepare our students to do research during the summer. During the summer, they do full-time work on their projects with a faculty member. And this can be on a topic that the faculty member might be working on, or it could be a project that the faculty helped them build up from the ground up. So that includes IRB approval and all the goodies, all right? Second, well, we pay them for their time, of course. Last year, we paid them $5,000, and we also pay for them to stay in the dorms. That helps them stay, on campus and take advantage of all the things, the proximity, take a break from home and such. We also pair them with faculty mentors. So our students have 2 mentors, one within their discipline and one that is in a different discipline. So the goal is that their discipline mentor helps them understand their research projects and provide them specific advice about grad school within the discipline that the student is going to be studying in. And then the second mentor allows them to, just basically talk and check in, which means that they have further information about grad school, things to do, how to prioritize things, and such things. And then the third component would be career development. So we talk to our students about how to, compose their CV, how to write personal statements or statement of purpose, which sound the same, but they're different things. We help them understand basics of personal finances, how to interview for when they go to grad school interviews, and other things that help them become not just good applicants for grad school, but provide them the tools to be successful once they get to grad school. There's other things that we can do for our students. We offer GRE preparation by giving them access to practice materials. We help them subsidize the price of the exam, and we have ways of kind of engaging with them so they can prepare for the GRE. Another thing that we do is take them to the grad schools that they're interested in. So each student, as long as funding permits it, is taken to their top grad school that they are interested in, so they can see how they fit in that environment. Because the last thing I want students to do is to go to an institution that they're excited about, and then it's a hostile environment. And then the other thing that we can do is take them to conferences. We go to either McNair-specific conferences, or we go to national conferences in their disciplines, so they can present their research work and they can network with people in their field, people who have similar aspirations and such things. So that's a good way of keeping them engaged with not just the institution, the program, but also with the field of study that they want to be a part of. We also make sure that we support them with their books. Books are expensive, and our students come from low-income backgrounds, so we want to make sure that they have access to books, provide them a stipend each semester. We also provide them individualized guidance, so they talk to me, they talk to our GAs, our graduate assistants, and that's a way of us monitoring what's happening, make sure that they are on track, that they're doing well, that if there's a problem, we can figure it out early, and we can address it, and it happens. So I'm really glad we do that part. And then finally, we offer them a community. So a lot of times they just stop by the office to say hi. There's no point. They just want to know that they have a home base, a place on campus where they belong, where there's someone who will welcome them, someone who has their best interests at hand. But also, there's a community of peer support. So there's other students who are in a similar path, they have similar aspirations, and they can talk, they can share their concerns, they can celebrate together, and such things. So our students are very successful. So these are some of our STEM-specific outcomes. I'll talk about general outcomes in a second. But our students in STEM actually have about half a percentage, point, 0.54 points more in their GPAs when compared to their peers at CSU. That's also true that's in general, but that's also true for our Black African American students and for our Hispanic students. They also have higher graduation rates. So our students graduate at a rate of 10% percentage points higher than the students at the institution, and that's also true for our African American students. Now, I wanted to include the Latinx students here because I also want to show you that we still have a little bit of work to do. This has to do specifically because our students oftentimes, historically, a lot of our Latinx students wanted to pursue med school, and then the program would not be a good fit. So they don't get as much they didn't get as much of the program as other students did. However, we're working on that, and right now our students are doing much better. And also, you will see when we see the general students what kind of numbers we're talking about. Our students have a graduation rate overall that is much higher than the national average. So compared to the 61% of students who graduate nationally, our students graduate at a rate of 89%. And as you can see, that is also true for our Black students or for our Latino students, which means that we are making a really good job at diminishing the gap between outcomes among our minoritized students and our white students. Another way of measuring success would be to look at what our students are doing. So our McNair Scholars, we have served over 150 students by now. 125 of them are have already graduated with bachelor's degrees. And there's, of course, more on their way because they're still enrolled. About 53 of our students have gotten advanced degrees. So those are 5 PhDs so far, 42 master's degrees, 5 MDs, and 1 doctorate in physical therapy. And we currently have 18 graduates that are currently enrolled in grad school. So this kind of highlights how if we are intentional and we really put the work to do things that benefit our minoritized students, they can succeed because they have all the intellect to do it. They have all the inspiration to do it, and they do the hard work to achieve their goals. What we need to do is remove more of the barriers that are on their way. This is our 2021-2022 cohort. So as you can see, we have students from all walks of life. We have students who are who have graduated since this picture was taken a few months ago. And our students are with us doing all sorts of things. So that's why the pictures reflect not just one event, but several of the things that we engage in. So for instance, we have students attending conferences, students just joining us for dinner, students just hanging out around like our office. So our students are really engaged, are successful, they're bright, and they're an example of things that can be done when we put our energy towards initiatives that have them in mind and not just meeting some check mark, right? So as a quick summary of the things that I've talked to you today, these are my main thoughts. So different people have different paths, and we all benefit from understanding that and promoting equity so people can succeed within their own path. The success of minoritized students is the success of all of us. So we need to work on addressing systemic barriers to their success so they can achieve the things that they're working towards. We must address inequities at their source, and we must do it early on while we still have the students engaged and enrolled at our institutions, and then support them throughout the academic pathway so they can end up giving everything that they have to offer and meeting their full potential. Finally, minoritized students benefit specifically from high impact practices, and we would all be better off if we engage them that way. Finally, it doesn't matter what we're doing, from what platform you have, there's always a way that you can contribute to equity efforts. So I suggest you think which way you might be able to contribute. You don't have to think about saving the world. You can do one little thing at a time, and it would add up, because our experiences, our students' experiences are not limited to the classroom. They're on campus all day long, and there's many ways that we can address them, interact with them, make them feel included and that they belong. So that's all for me. Thank you very much.
We're absolutely delighted by the wisdom that we've received here. And I know we can probably talk hours about many of the things that have been shared, but we want to provide an opportunity for any individuals to ask questions. We have microphones on the end. I know I'm probably messing up the live stream because I'm not at the microphone, but I'm trying to talk as loudly as possible. But I want to encourage you to come and ask questions. And I have a ton of things that I can and would ask if you don't. So I don't want it to just be me. But I do want to give this one observation, and I just enjoyed it so much because Angel just has this unique knack of saying some really tough truths with a smile on it. And so, hopefully it allows us to digest it and to recognize it. So I'm going to turn it over to our first questioner this time.
Good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon, Dr. Reyes-Rodríguez. Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of questions about the admission to the McNair. So is this a group identified through some interviews? Is there an application process? Because it's an amazing program, and I'm thinking somehow it can ultimately spread to better practices among all faculty, among all support systems at Cleveland State, so that even students from minoritized groups that are not in McNairs would benefit from this. So if you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question. So the McNair Scholars Program is orchestrated in a way where we have a cycle of recruitment, interviews, and then implementing these high-impact practices. It starts with letting people know that we exist. So we do that in a few ways. We advertise in traditional ways, but we also seek out potential candidates based on demographic and socioeconomic data, and we email them the information about the program so they know that it exists. Once we do that, then we invite them to complete an application so we can assess whether they would be a good fit for the program. And what we're trying to make sure first is that they meet the federal criteria, because again, McNair is a federal program, is written in law. So if I do something wrong, the worst thing that can happen is not that I get fired, is that I get in jail. So, we make sure that that takes place. But once we identify potential students and students who want to go to grad school that meet the other criteria, then we interview them. We make sure that their goals align with the missions of the program. That's the component that was missing early on, but we have addressed that already. So we make sure that we engage with the students who would benefit from the programming, and then if they change their minds later, then we make it work. But that's a different story. So we interview them, and after interviewing them, we select them, and then they join the program. So it has become my mission since I started working at CSU to make some of the components of the program kind of spread out through the institution to make sure that other students benefit from our program, because there's a finite number of students that I can help, right? So we want to make sure that we learn the things that work from the program, and we can start implementing those things across campus to make sure that more and more students benefit from from these practices because it has clearly demonstrated that they work, and we want to make sure that other students get access to those things. So I have a running list of resources, and every time somebody shows up to my door and tells me they want to be a part of McNair and they clearly don't have a chance of getting in, I make sure that I point them to the resources that they can access that would be the components of the program, just not centralized, as a way of connecting them with resources. But my goal is that eventually we would have a way of providing more of the resources in a unified way to more students, whether that's McNair or that's McNair-like programming.
Great talk.
Thank you.
My question is, I happen to be a non-traditional student, so my pathway, I left high school, went to community college, then finished, got an associate's, went to a 4-year university, and now I'm here at Case as a grad student. Going back to my undergrad days, I felt that a lot of the programming wasn't targeted to me, or that I kind of fell through the cracks because I went through community college first. So I'm wondering, what does CSU do, or just the McNair program in general, do to serve those non-traditional students?
That's a great question. Thank you. We do different things. So CSU as a whole has a path of engaging the students so they can be provided with the resources to transition into a 4-year institution. So there's built-in programming for that. But that's kind of where it ends. So what we do at McNair, so actually, let me go back a few slides. So if you see that group picture, you can tell that we have at least 3 non-traditional students that are easy to spot. So actually, there's 5, but we'll go to that later. So some of our students come from backgrounds where they were not able to pursue school at, just immediately after high school. So we have to figure out where they're at and understand their individual circumstances so we can create a pathway for them to succeed based on where they are. So that means whether it is to structure programming at times that are off. So for instance, I don't show up to my office until at least 9:30 because I know that I will be there until 7 p.m. Because a lot of our students have to work and I have to talk to them after they leave work at 5, right? So it's important that we accommodate for their needs. And that's part of the programming that we do. We make sure that things are offered more than once. So we give a talk on a Tuesday at 11:30, and then we repeat it on, let's say, Thursday at 4 p.m. And whatever it is, we make sure that we have materials that are available in recorded format. So we record things, we send them. We avoid using Blackboard as much as possible, just because that's just an extra complicator. So I just post things directly to YouTube so they can see it from whatever platform they feel more comfortable. And it's also important not to be condescending, which is where a lot of us fail at, right? Because we assume that, they're, so-and-so is older, so they may struggle with this. And so-and-so is older, so I'm just going to lower the bar here a little bit, right? So we have to make sure that we're not condescending as part of including our non-traditional students, because they actually have a lot of life experiences that would benefit everyone else, right? So what we do is make sure that they are allowed to bring those in, and we remove a lot of that nonsense on the side. Does that answer your question? All right, cool.
Any other questions?
Thank you for just a great talk. I'm tagging on with maybe a couple other questions. With the McNair program is just so outstanding, and with the financial support it provides, I just have to ask, does that help, talking about institutional structure barriers or financial barriers, does it help make the case a little easier in terms of gaining some financial support for the non-McNair scholars? I mean, your summer support is it's incredible. It's what it needs to be. Does that help at all in making that kind of argument by having the McNair program there?
Yeah, that's a great question, specifically because it is difficult to argue with numbers and with, like our data. So when we tell people that we need money and that it has to be that much, and this is the reason, it's hard to make an argument that it's wasted money just because we see results, right? So what we're working on is to make sure that we document how every dollar is spent, the purpose and the outcome. So when we talk about expanding, because there will be a day that we will outgrow the McNair Scholars Program, right? And we will need to bring that to the greater university community as an institutional program. So we need to be able to document how much is needed for what, and less than that won't get the work done. So we can get creative for an emergency, of course, but if we want sustained results, we need to be able to make the proper investment. And I can tell you that it's not a huge investment when it comes to departments. So we don't spend that much more money than a small department would invest in events, for example. So we just need to make sure that when we make an argument for our programs, we tell them what are the things that are being prioritized, the outcomes, and kind of highlight that return in investment. So hopefully that means that we do make it easier to make an argument for expanding the services to other groups. Again, this would also be an example of showing how when you make programming for minoritized students in particular, others can benefit. Because if we expand our research infrastructure, other students will benefit too from a campus that is much more research-oriented, much more invested in generating knowledge, in keeping students engaged constantly with the institution.
So I understand that the McNair is focused on students prior to entering grad school. I'm wondering, are there programs like or similar to McNair for graduate students, or is anything like that in the works at CSU?
So that's a great question. For grad students, currently we don't have programming that is directly structured in a similar way to McNair at the grad school level. There are efforts to keep students engaged. There's an office that supports grad students, but it's not structured in the same way that McNair is, with the same objectives that McNair has. So that's one area of improvement that we can see in the future happening. At the national level, there's organizations that serve grad students in particular. It's just a little bit harder to connect the dots because, as a grad student, you're extremely busy. So a lot of times it becomes something else to do. So it would be much easier if these were core components of your grad education at the school level. We'd be much more successful. And we don't have them. I'm not aware of anything like that at Case either at the grad level. The postbac, of course, which is what I did, the prep program, that's kind of fits the middle ground. So you have already graduated from college, but you haven't applied to grad school just yet. So that kind of is the in-between stage. But support at this level for the grad school at the grad school level is not terribly common, but needed.
Am I allowed to just comment? So hi, everyone. I'm Heather Burton, and I'm Associate Vice President for the Office for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity. And actually here at Case Western Reserve, we do have some programs that have started for graduate students and to work with graduate students. So I didn't want that to go unrecognized, specifically like within our College of Engineering, within our School of Nursing, within the law school. So there are specific programs that are working to assist our graduate students. So I didn't want to go under the radar. And let me say that I am a proponent of TRIO programs, College Access. I worked for Upward Brown Educational Talent Search, and I was the director of McNair.
Ooh.
So thank you for all your work.
Thank you for that, and also thank you for the for the update, because I didn't know that, so that's great.
Thank you for your talk. It was really good. So I'm a big picture person. I'm a big picture person. So you touched on this a couple times, like the big picture. And so like when you think about the big picture, it brings you back to the why we're doing this, like why even have this program. So you showed some of your success measures. So I was thinking about like you're following these graduates, which is great, and you can show the numbers and how this is impacting like, you know, numbers with the money and getting the program funded. That's great. I'm wondering, have you thought about seeing the way in which these graduates are still continuing, you know, to like do equity work, you know, in different capacities that may or may not, you know, they might even be thinking about that they're doing it. So that's another big picture measure of like how they're still, even if they're not directly being like mentors in a program, they're still, they're passing it on in a way they may not recognize. Is that like, did you think about this kind of success measure to then also include in this kind of presentation with the things you were talking about, big picture, why this program is implemented?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Thank you. Yeah, I've been thinking about how to get around that. The way we started collecting that information was basically collecting testimonials where people could tell us what they're up to and how they have benefited from the program. The next step is to actually reach out and see what is their level of involvement with other groups, specifically equity efforts as part of their work. So I'm a big believer that there's many ways of providing support and contribute to equity work. So for some of us who are really interested in the topic, then the obvious thing would be to just work on equity initiatives. For other people, it might be just existing and doing their best work. So you can see real examples of people living to their full potential. And I think the challenge that I haven't solved just yet is how to measure that impact. So, but we're looking towards collecting information that tells us how involved the program alumni are with the community, but we haven't gotten there yet. But yeah, but that's one of the things that we want to be able to do as well, because that would for continuing funding for McNair itself, that we wouldn't need that. But when we are trying to make the argument that we have to expand services for the rest of the university, it's important to show the multiplying effect that helping one person has. So we still need that data. We just haven't gotten around how to make it the most efficient way. Just because you don't want to be reaching out to people too often, because you easily go to their spam folders.
I'll ask one last question. You mentioned high-impact programs and mentoring, and I'm wondering if you could give us examples of what you see as high-impact programs that are successful in working with the McNair scholars or any students we're trying to engage.
Right. So any high impact program is defined by involving the student in the process, right? So McNair would be an example of a program, but also the way that some schools are changing their curriculum would be a high impact program in a way, right? So there's already schools that are thinking about changing their curriculum. So writing is much more essential to how things are graded. At CSU, for example, we're working towards finding paths of removing barriers, but also involving the students much more in research projects, in community initiatives, making them part of student life more often. Those are all ways that you can contribute to keeping the student engaged with the institution. At the national level, of course, there's other McNair programs. There's the prep program with us, something similar. But there's also different funding agencies that are promoting and funding research that is focused on not much more the research component, but giving the students the experiential learning experience, making sure that they So they can do research, but they can also go and be interns where, there's not as much research happening, but there's it's an experiential learning way of learning. I guess I said the same thing twice. But yeah, does that address your question?
Yes.
All right, cool.
Yes, it does. It does. Well, I would like to take this opportunity to ask you all to join me in thanking Dr. Reyes-Rodríguez for sharing this incredible wisdom. And as I can untangle this, we also want to give you a small gift of appreciation from our office. It has some goodies in there, which include 2 books. One is by Dr. Heather McGee, The Sum of Us. The other book is How to Have Difficult Conversations About Race, written by Kwame Christian, a book that we will use this year, and we will have Kwame Christian on campus next semester, so that will be part of it. And there's some other goodies in there that's included as well, just to let you know how much we appreciate you. And before I give you all an opportunity to talk to him one-on-one and to share some time, I do want to extend thanks to our incredible team, Janae Johnson, who just did so much work in coordinating it, Michael Bustamante, our Director of Diversity, and you all met Dr. Heather Burton, who is also a member of our team. So we want to thank you, and we thank you all for sharing this time with us. So.
Thank you, appreciate it.